everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Inner Typewriter, the show with typewriters, coffee, and conversations about how we can make our writing better. I'm your host, Scott Calhoun. Welcome to our guest, John Byrne Barry.
Great to be here.
Yeah, you are the author of Bones in the Wash, which is a novel, and also the Green Noir. Wasted, which takes place in Berkeley.
In the recycling world, yes. There's also books named Wasted that are about being drunk or anorexic. But this is in the recycling world.
Not to be confused with.
You can't copyright a title.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. See, we're already learning something within the first 10 seconds. But today's episode is all about the author tour. You've done this a little bit, or a lot. Tell us, what should the author tour be? Well,
before you say that, as you were asking the question, I was just thinking, a friend of mine way back when said, I'd really like to do an author tour, but I don't have to write the book. So he sort of romanticized it, because he was imagining, being on, popular radio stations and being on the TV shows and this and that. But for most of us, it's not quite like that. I quite enjoyed the author tour, but I did have to manage my expectations because sometimes hardly anybody shows up. But the first book I did, Bones in the Wash, Politics is Tough, Family is Tougher, I published it in December of 2013, and about a month later, I did my first book launch, open house reading type thing at a cafe in Berkeley, about a block from where I lived. It was a beautiful, sunny January or February day. Many of my friends lived walking distance from there. I lived walking distance from there. And I had, it was a cafe I'd already gone to, and a full house, 50 people or something like that. And I read some, my son read, my wife read some stuff, and we had a party. It was great. We actually had to go home. I had to actually send someone to my house because I ran out of books to sell. None of my other book tour events have gone that well. So my first one went better than any.
How many did you bring, just as a matter of managing expectations?
I don't remember. I brought 25 or something like that. I've never brought fewer than I needed since. So most of the time you bring some back. But getting people there is tough because it was my first book, because it was in my neighborhood, because I sort of made a big deal out of it and basically expected my friends to come. There were some strangers, but mostly it was people I knew. So I did maybe 4 or 5 other ones for this book, and then my second book I did like 12 or 13 events. One was here at Copperfields, right down the street here, and that went pretty well too. But I also did events where 4 people showed up, or 6. And the thing is that if I'm sitting in a room like I do, I'm in a reading group at the library, and there's 4 or 5 people there, and I'm reading something out loud, I don't feel as that's a failure. But if there's seats for 40, and there's only 6 people there, then that's not so great.
Right.
So it's a lot of work doing this. You got to contact the cafe owner or bookstore owner or this or that, and then you got to do most of the promotion yourself. You know the old P.T. Barnum line about promotion? Without promotion, something terrible will happen? Nothing. So if you like being in front of people and telling stories, it's great.
So I mean, it sounds like it's a lot of work, it's a lot of logistics, coordination, and it might go badly. I mean, why do an author tour?
Well,
in the first place,
writing is a solitary activity. So one of the exciting parts of it is when you're done and people are interested in the book. What's even better than a tour is someone who's read the book who comes and tells you how much they like it. But at a book tour event, usually people haven't read it yet because that's why they're coming, to get the book.
Right.
But it's a chance to talk about what you've been sort of doing in solitary for years. And mostly I will read less than 10 minutes total and spend the rest of the time telling a story about how I came to write the book. And people like to ask questions too, and so make it as interactive as possible. I just think the social aspect of a book tour is what makes it worthwhile, even if you look at how much time and money you spent, not that it costs that much to do, but time, and how much you make, not that much. So if you were a cold-blooded accountant, you would say don't bother.
Interesting. But
I'm
we're not cold-blooded
No,
accountants.
no.
We're
Yes,
at the
right,
very
right.
bottom of at the end of the day, where we could be bleeding hearts. And
That's right.
artists
Right. Yeah. So.
So we'll put ourselves out there. For your first book, your very first author tour, did you set out sort of figuring it out on your own, or did you have a template that you were working with?
You know, I didn't know any of this stuff when I first started out. So I just searched things and tried things out, and it wasn't so terrible. It's just that I didn't have a template. The template came from all over the place.
Right.
When I did the second book, by that time, I actually sort of had the template, and I had a more expansive tour, but none of the events were as good as that first one that I just sort of winged it. I think it was just circumstantial that the place I did it and the time I did it, Sunday afternoon, everything came together.
Is there anything in that one time that it went perfectly? Is there anything we can jot down that?
Well, actually, it
ideal?
didn't go perfectly in the sense that I think it went too long. I had a number of other people reading things, and one of the pieces of feedback I got was just shorten the whole thing.
So what does that mean in concrete terms?
Well, I think that, that you want to keep it in more like 45 minutes or something like that.
Wow.
Again, it depends on questions and all that kind of stuff. And you don't want to read too much, because reading is not as interesting as sort of talking, I think. And people are used to reading on their own. And even if you're a good reader, I think one chapter is enough, or one scene. Plus, you can't just jump into chapter 12. People don't know where you are.
Right. Well, that's a whole other
that
thing.
That said, I do enjoy reading out loud, and I do it whenever I have a chance. But I keep it to 8 minutes or under.
How do you hold the book and hold the microphone at the same?
Well, actually,
And
there's a place I do it in Nevada called Poetry Farm, and the microphone is right here. Or
it's
like
on a stand.
It's on a stand.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have also read off my phone or iPad
that's
or whatever.
interesting.
Yeah. Because just because it's printed doesn't mean I don't also have a digital version. Yeah.
So how do you gauge demand, and how do you like?
You know, I don't even think I worry about demand because there's no downside to bringing more books than you need. It's more like how to get people there and how to reach people beyond my circle. You know, I've been to a lot of other people's readings, and I've been to readings where I was the only person there other than a few friends of the author. It's a tough thing. You have to accept that there might not be hardly anybody people show up. And when some strangers show up, who just show up because they saw it listed in the paper or saw the poster, that's great. These are people that I don't even know who I am.
Right.
So I don't just worry about gauging demand, because you could also say, I ran out of books, go online and get it.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
yeah.
It's kind of like, if you take it personally, it's like your birthday party or something, and you're hoping everyone who RSVP'd shows up.
Yes, that's exactly right. And in fact, I have been at events where it's like, wait, so-and-so said they'd be here, they're not here.
Oh, should I be offended?
Well, especially because I'm doing that while I'm talking out there, so I've got to pay attention to what I'm saying. Yeah. I did have one event in Albuquerque, and in fact, it was in a cafe on Central Avenue in Albuquerque that's in the book. There are several scenes in the book that took place here, and no one came. But we sat next to a couple who had to leave before we were about to start, and they bought a book. So
something came out of it.
And then the next day, this is actually one of the best events of a book tour. My sister, who lives in Santa Fe, did a house party, and 20, 25 of her friends and neighbors showed up, and these are people I'd never met before, and we just talked and ate, and then I did 45 minutes of talking and reading, and sold some books, and it was great because these were people that did not know me, and I wasn't thinking in advance about, well, I hope so-and-so shows up, because I didn't even know who those people were. I'm going to do more of that this next time I get a book done and go out there. ask some of my friends to host house parties.
House parties,
Yeah.
So it was interesting that you had one event that was seemingly tailor-made. It was a place that was in the book.
Right.
That wasn't as successful as a total wild card, a house party.
Well,
that was the very next day.
But the wild card wasn't a house party in the sense that my sister agreed to do it, and she thought it was a great excuse to bring her friends and neighbors around, and also I got to meet them. And
they knew it was a book reading, right?
They knew it was a book reading, and they knew it was her brother. So.
Got it. Yeah.
So
it's not like they're showing up to a party and they're like, "Oh, this was an author tour."
But in fact, it was open to more people than just her friends. I think she put up some posters in the bulletin boards and things like that. But they had to call a number or an email they weren't just putting their address out there.
Right.
And that's the way a lot of house parties work. Is if you're interested, contact us. We'll tell you where it is. So I'm going to do that again.
Is there any social media or outreach type things that you can do to try to get people's awareness ahead of time?
Well, yeah, you do all those things. And one of the things I heard recently, which is sort of discouraging, is that people need, I hope I have this number right, people need to see a particular event in like 7 different places before they sort of really grasp it there. So you send an email out, you put it on Facebook, you have a LinkedIn event. You put a poster up. It's listed in the Pacific Sun or the Marin IJ,
Upcoming
and
events.
hopefully, I have that experience myself. I see something, I forget about it, and then I see it again. I think, oh yeah, I want to go to that. It takes some reinforcing to do. So that is the challenge: is promoting your event or your book is harder than writing it in many respects.
Oh no.
No, I mean, it's true. It's true. And in fact, lots of people, including myself, say, yeah, well, I don't want to do all that stuff. I just want to write the book. But you can't do that.
Writing the book is really hard.
It is, but you can't just do that because the world doesn't work that way.
Yeah, jeez.
So,
on
the other hand,
you gotta push the boulder all the way up.
On the other hand, you don't want to be like walking into parties and say, hey, I wrote a book, will you buy it? And you can't do that either. You sort of have to do it in a more subtle way.
So as you're, let's say you're setting up your author tour, how do you come up with what you're going to say, your spiel, so to speak? Is there like any easy guide that you can give?
I would just say, making it as much of a story as possible. Let me just use one example. This book here, Wasted, there was a story I told every time I did an event. I wrote this book first, before Bones in the Wash, but published Bones in the Wash first. What happened is, with Wasted, I sent it to like 60 agents or something like that. I got about 8 nibbles. I had a couple agents who I thought were going to say, sure, I'll take it. It didn't happen. So then I just decided, okay, I wrote my book. The universe didn't want it, so I'll just go back to living my life. And then I got into writing another book. And then after this was done, it was enough fun doing the tour and all this, that I thought, well, I'll go back and rewrite Wasted one more time,
right,
and get it out there. So one of the things I did is I put the Wasted on my Kindle, and I remember one day around lunchtime, I was hungry, I was reading the book on the Kindle, and I could not stop reading it because I was 75% through, and I couldn't remember what happened. So I was reading it like a reader. And it was the only time I ever had that experience, because most of the time you're just way too close to it. But it had been 2 years or whatever since I had last touched it. And it was really exciting. So that's a story I told of the only experience I had of reading my book as the way a reader would, as opposed to the writer.
Wow, that's cool.
And I think I might have talked about, when I did Bones in the Wash, I talked about how I knocked on doors in Albuquerque during the presidential campaign, and what made that tedious work more interesting was every day I was looking around at the town thinking, okay, I'm going to write a book set here. What's interesting around here? What's unique? What pops out at me?
So part of your spiel when you're talking about your book isn't to just go straight into, my book is great. It's to talk about some interesting experience that you had either writing it or coming back to it.
Yeah, like tell a story. Well, actually, I'm going to use, if I can test this out, the book I'm writing right now, which is finished but not really finished, it's about end of life. It's I call it an assisted suicide family thriller about a middle-aged man whose father has cancer and dementia, and he wants his son's help to end his life. And the son says no, and then he eventually relents, and then at his father's memorial, his sister accuses him of murder. So that's the story. And I'm already thinking about sort of all these things, the publication, the book tour, and all this. And I have a story that I'm going to tell at the next book tour I do, which is I heard from Ram Dass. You know who Ram Dass is? Spiritual leader. Anyway, it's an old Chinese story. It's not his own story. And the story is this. And this is the kind of story I will tell, I promise, unless you think it's terrible. But so there's an old farmer, and he's too old to work in the fields anymore. So he spends all day sitting on his front porch, watching his children work the fields. One day, the eldest son comes up to the front porch with a box and says, "Too many mouths to feed here, Father, get in the box." And the father gets in the box, the son puts a lid on it and starts dragging it toward the cliff that's at the edge of the farm. And then he hears this knock. And it's his father, he takes the lid off, and the father says, "Son, I understand what you're doing and why, but I have a suggestion. Why don't you just take me out of the box and throw me over the cliff? Then the box will be here for you when your children need it." And that just took 30 seconds. It's a story. It's not exactly what my book is about, but it covers some of the same territory. And yet, it's something people can grasp in that short period of time. And I managed to, hearing it once on the radio, remember well enough that I could repeat it. So it's a story as opposed to just facts or something.
That's an interesting way of arriving at the space.
Yeah. So that's what I aim to do, is find memorable little anecdotes or stories that I can tell that lead into the book.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that son is like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have to go through this same exact thing.
Yes.
So we heard a little bit about how long it should be, 45 minutes. What should success look like? Is it, should they put out 10 seats and then as more people come, then bring out the next row of chairs?
That's what I would do. That's what I would do, because one of the events I'd hoped for a pretty big crowd for, I think they had about 40 seats out and there were about 15 people who came. And if there would have been 12 seats out and 15 people came, it would have felt just fine.
Yeah, the momentum is like, oh, there's not enough seats.
Right. So, but mostly, as I said, it's about managing your expectations and also just treating the whole thing professionally. If only a few people show up, but you just say, let's pull the chairs in closer, and you have a good, engaging conversation, well, that's a success, even if inside you're thinking, damn, why did only 3 people come? So I would just say, don't get discouraged. Just when 0 people came, actually 0 was better than 1. If one person come, then I'd sort of be embarrassed. When no one came, I could just leave.
Right.
So
and the very next day might be the best day of the tour.
Right.
So it's not a barometer.
I think the other thing is that because, I think for Wasted I did 12 events, most of them were pretty good. Some of them not so much. But if you do 12, there's a good chance that some of them will be pretty good, and one of them will be the worst one no matter what, right? So you just have to expect that if you're going to do 12 events, one will be the worst.
I like it.
Yeah.
A dozen's a good number of total?
I don't know if a dozen's a good number or not, as much as the dozen was just sort of seemed like...
you're going to get a bad one.
About as much as I could. Well, part of it too is I live in Mill Valley. I used to live in Berkeley, so I had an event in Mill Valley, I had one in San Rafael, I had one in Oakland, I had one in Berkeley, I had a few out of town, but you run out of places to do it. Because if you do it in a place where no one knows you, that's the hardest.
Right, and then the economics begin to be counterproductive.
Right. I did one in Detroit where my brother teaches, and there were 50 people there, but it was me and 2 other people on a panel, and a lot of the people there were students of various professors there, writers in English, majors and things like that. So they were interested in the process. And that worked out really well.
One thing
I was also already there.
Right. Oh, so it was sort of a sunk cost.
Yes, I was going to visit, and I said, by the way, you think you could get me?
One thing I want to touch on before we end is the difference between having an author tour book signing at a cafe where you're selling the books out of your own card trunk versus having it at a bookstore where they've had to either on consignment or they've got inventory. There's a different calculation for how much money you make, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the problem with the bookstore is you're competing up against all the other books there. And there was a guy I heard recently who wrote dog books, and he didn't do any events at bookstores. He did events at pet stores because there weren't other books being sold there.
Right.
So I mean, it's great to do a bookstore. One of the great pleasures of my life was at Copperfield's 3 months after my book event there. My book was still on the shelf there. Oh, it's great to see. But then 6 months later, some of them didn't sell, and I had to take them back. So that's the way the world works. Right. You know, you want them all to sell, but unlike online, the advantage of online is that there's no inventory. So, but a bookstore, if something doesn't sell, you take it back, or they remainder it, or whatever.
Got it. Well,
so I mean, it's good to do it if you can, but it's better to do a cafe if you can work it too.
Got it. Well, I hope everyone was taking notes. That's all the time we have for that. Thank you once again. John Byrne Barry was our guest, author of Wasted and Bones in the Wash.
And I'm embarrassed to say how much I enjoy talking about myself.
Yeah. Oh, no. Well, we're happy to have you on, and that's what it's all about.
Great.
And thanks again for bringing the typewriter.
Okay. You're welcome.
All right. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy typing, and don't forget to follow, share, and subscribe.